So I have a Family Feud question of my own. Here we go. There are 50 states in the United States. Of the 50 states, how many out of the 50 have a city called Hope? Is it 10 out of 50? Is it 17 out of 50? 25 or 49? 10, 17, 25 or 49? What's your answer?
Mark, are you able to see the answers at all?
No, can't see them. I'm just curious
Okay.
what's leading.
All right. So far I got 17, 10, 49, 49, 49, 10. 17, 10, 17, 49, 17, 49, 49. Looks like a mix. 25, 25,
Yeah.
49.
So it's all over. So the answer is 49. Did you know that there's a city? There's actually a city called Hope, Wisconsin. I looked it up. It's right near Blooming Grove, Wisconsin. It's an unincorporated territory. It's a small city, but it's just like Hope. It's sometimes hard for our clients to see, but it's always there. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, where there's no hope, people die. So one of the ways I've done this work all these years, I've been a certified alcohol and drug abuse counselor for 42 years, is I collect recovery stories that give me hope. So here's a story. I have a friend named Juan, and Juan is Puerto Rican. And Juan grew up in Chicago in a neighborhood called Humboldt Park, a Puerto Rican neighborhood on the northwest side of the city of Chicago. When Juan was a little boy, he went to his father and he said, "Papi, I'm going to be the next Roberto Clemente." I'm not sure if you know Roberto Clemente. He was a Hall of Fame baseball player for the Pittsburgh Pirates. Roberto Clemente is my baseball hero. And it's not just because he was such a great baseball player. He was my hero because Roberto Clemente was a humanitarian. You know, every summer he would go back to Puerto Rico and build houses for people and repair houses for people who had lost their houses during the hurricane. I'd like to think that if Roberto Clemente were alive today, he'd be in Puerto Rico right now, building homes for people and repairing homes for people who lost them during the recent hurricane. Anyway, my friend Juan, he became homeless and heroin addicted, and he slept outside on the very baseball diamond where he had dreams of becoming the next Roberto Clemente. He went into treatment, and he suggested that I share with you, we should stop telling our clients that things always will get better right away in recovery, because things don't always get better right away in recovery. They'll get better, but not always right away. So Juan said as soon as he entered recovery, the state of Illinois caught up to him and started garnishing his paycheck for back money he owed the state. He said, "Mark, the state of Illinois was taking so much money out of my paycheck. I was back eating in soup kitchens. I felt like I was homeless again." One day he was so fed up, he said, "I was going out to relapse." And he ran into a man that he'd gone to treatment with. And the man said, "Don't go get high. Call the state of Illinois, set up a meeting with the state, tell them your story. Don't ask the state for a dime." So Juan called the state, set up a meeting, said, "Listen, I'm in recovery, I'm working, but so much money's being garnished from my paycheck, I feel like I'm homeless again. I'm back eating in soup kitchens." And the state worker said, "You were homeless?" "I was homeless." He said, "When we served those wage garnishment papers to that address, whose house was that?" Juan said, "My mother's house." He said, "You didn't live there?" I said, "No." He tore up the paperwork in front of Juan, threw it in the garbage can, and said, "Illegal served, case dismissed, you owe the state nothing." My friend Juan places more people in sober housing than anyone else in the state of Illinois. He said, "Recovery is the gift that continues to give." He said, "People help me, so now I'm helping other people." He recently went to his father's gravesite. He said, "Papi, I've become Roberto Clemente. I house people." I want to take a moment to thank you for being really givers of hope, bringers of hope. Know that I know that the world cannot compensate you enough for the important work you do. So thank you so very much for that work. We're going to focus on helping clients cope with loss. So we begin with the definition of key terms. The first is grief, a natural emotional reaction to a significant loss or expected loss. It is an essential component of the eventual process of recovery from loss. So what I want to point out about grief, it's natural and automatic. You suffer a loss, you will grieve. Now, let me lean in for dramatic effect. There's nothing pathological about grief. It's not a DSM-5 diagnosis. It's natural and it's automatic. And let me share something with you which might blow your mind. Most people who suffer a loss, they don't need therapy. Most people who suffer a loss, they don't need therapy. They need support. Mourning, the outward expression of grief. Mourning is very individualized. It can be manifest in tears, although not everyone who suffers a loss cries. And some people cry internal tears. You ever work with a client and they said something really sad and you felt like you wanted to cry on the inside? And then as soon as you felt like you wanted to cry, the client started crying. You know why? Because you cried for them first, even though they saw no tears. Mourning can be manifest in clothes, as in when a firefighter dies, members of the fire department show up wearing firefighter uniforms. Sometimes they'll show up to the funeral in a fire truck. Or when a police officer dies, they show up wearing police officer uniforms. When a member of the military dies, their fellow comrades show up in wearing military uniforms. Or like in Chicago, when a gang member dies, their fellow gang members will show up wearing these T-shirts with a picture of their gang brother on the T-shirt, and the T-shirt says "Rest in peace." Uniforms and certain colors of clothes, like wearing all black to a funeral, talking about the deceased and celebrating. Some people believe that when a person dies, they go to a better place, and so one way they might mourn is through celebration. So I've put together here my favorite 4 quotes about grief. You say, he has favorite quotes about grief? Yes, I do. You don't have to experience grief, but you can only avoid it by avoiding love. So one of my young office managers, she so loved her husband. They wanted to have a baby, and she miscarried 4 times. She kept trying, and I sent her this quote. You don't have to experience grief, but you can only avoid it by avoiding love. Incredible story from the Chicken Soup for the Soul series about this program in the prison called Adopt a Grandchild. And there were these women between the ages of 68 to 88 years old who volunteered to be surrogate grandmothers for these incarcerated inmates. This one woman who was 72 years old was invited to be the surrogate grandmother for the most violent inmate in the entire prison. He didn't know his father and mother died when he was 5. He was so bitter. He was grieving. He was angry. He was fighting all the time. And she showed up at 72 years old. He said, "Hello, it's me, Grandma." He said, "Get out of here, lady. I don't want to see you." Okay. She came back 2 days later. "It's me again, Grandmother. Didn't I say I didn't want to see you?" This went on for a long period of time. And one day she brought him a cake, and it had candles on it. And she asked him to blow out the candles, and she sung happy birthday to him. He brought tears to his eyes. You see, in 45 years on the planet, no one ever brought him a birthday cake. No one ever sang happy birthday to him. In fact, her visits were the catalyst that helped him turn his life around. Reporters asked him, what did she do? He said, every time she showed up with love. You don't have to experience grief, but you can only avoid it if you avoid love. To spare oneself from grief at all costs can only be achieved only at the price of total detachment, which excludes the ability to achieve happiness. You know that the research says the happiest people in the world are the people that have the best quality relationships. That's why we help the clients we serve develop their social network, because relationships are important to happiness. However, but when we get close to people, we'll experience loss. Love and grief come as a package deal. If you love, one day you will know sorrow. And then a final quote. They say the philosopher Socrates never cried. If you've never cried, it means you've never deeply loved, even if those tears are internal. Losses we grieve. Let's take a moment, if you will. Let us chat about losses that your clients are grieving. And these are clients you work with that have addictions, mental illness, and co-occurring disorders. What losses are they currently grieving? You can put your response in chat. And I'll check in with you, Amy, to you can let me know what they're putting.
For those of you who asked about the PowerPoint, Mark, is it okay that a PowerPoint goes out after this meeting?
Yes,
the
the
crowd?
PowerPoint
Okay.
has their name written all over. This is your PowerPoint at this point. Sure.
Okay, then we'll continue on with so hopefully that answers your question about that. But the other things that they're saying are loss of their old life,
How
loss
about
of
that?
their housing, loss of mom, their husband, etc. And then another person said family, they are unable to reach out to because they are using. And then another person said parent death. Another person said death to gun violence. And then I don't want to skip. Son who is incarcerated, loss of friends.
You know what's significant to me, listening to what you all are saying? What's significant to me is that we know that we work with lots of clients who medicate loss with the use of alcohol and other drugs. So that means that if what I just said is true, then all of you should be in the business of helping the clients that you serve, the members that you serve, the peers that you serve, cope with loss. You know, the first response to my question was their old life. You know, when I first started working in mental health, after spending a decade and a half working in substance use disorders, it's just a cruelty of even like schizophrenia when the obvious symptoms show up. It's the person is often in their 20s. Now they're hearing voices, seeing things that others can't see, hearing things that others can't hear, right? Or delusional thinking sets in. So they're struggling right now. But they remember the life they had before those voices. And some people, they mourn that life. And then one day after years of struggle, they get in recovery. They become like recovery coaches or recovery sports specialists or therapists. That's the good news. Okay, so let's begin with a discussion of losses in infancy and childhood, the birthing process. You know, somebody said that childbirth is the first eviction, the first time you get put out of your apartment. Visualize the yet to be born, sleeping in the womb of their mother in a warm environment. Then all of a sudden they're yanked out from that warmth into a cold room. The doctor sort of hits them on the back, a little child abuse, right? They cut the umbilical cord so there's a separation right away, right? If it's a young male, circumcision, and then they put you underneath an infrared, an interrogation light, right? What's the first thing the newborn does? They cry. We come into this world grieving. When mom leaves the room, I don't know if you've ever seen those videos of newborns. Like they've been listening to their mother's sound of their mother's voice for 9 months before they were even born. Now they're born and their mother leaves the room and they start looking for her. And if they don't see her, they cry. They're grieving. The end of nursing. So the baby was breastfed. The baby was nursed. And then one day the mother says, okay, it's time to stop. And the baby has a fit. The baby misses that closeness. The baby is grieving. The first day of preschool, you watch your parents walk away. You start to cry. Being left with a babysitter. Matter of fact, let me share this with you. I did some work with these really, really rich men. And they wanted to be better men. And we were talking about when they grew up in rich families and they had nannies. And you should have saw these men cry. They told similar stories. That one day, they called their nanny mommy. Or they said to their nanny, I love you. And their biological mother heard them call their nanny mommy and say, I love you. And they never saw their nanny again. And 50 years later, they're still grieving. Deaths, a new sibling. Let me ask you a question. When you were a kid growing up, did you ever get dethroned by another sibling? They came into the world and the attention shifted from you to them. If you had that experience, here's the question. You can put your response in chat. How long does it take to get over being dethroned by a sibling? How long does it take to get over that? What do you think? A week, 1,000 years, 10 years, a day? How long does it take to get over being dethroned by a sibling?
Somebody said the rest of their lives, and somebody said never.
Okay, that's deep, isn't it?
Somebody said 90 days. Somebody said it took me until I was 30.
Somewhere
Something.
between 90 days and 90 years. Yeah. Yeah. That's a loss that share with us. Yeah.
I said I was actually happy. I wanted a little brother.
Nice.
So
it varies.
Yeah, it varies.
We're still talking about losses in infancy and childhood. No Santa. Do you remember when you were like 41 and you discovered there was no Santa Claus? Any of us grieved. Or when they told you that you were too old to go trick-or-treating and you were angry, which is a part of grief. You know, this is the one, Halloween is the one holiday that adults often want to snatch back that was taken from them in childhood. They say we spend more money on Halloween costumes. We spend more money on Halloween as adults than any holiday outside of Christmas and Mother's Day. The nanny leaves, or the kid switches schools. They miss their old school, their old classmates, their friends. Or you go from one grade to the next grade, or from middle school where you're on the top to being a freshman in high school. You grieve. You miss being on top. You see, I believe that the losses we experience in childhood help prepare us for some of those losses we experience later. Losses in adolescence, divorce, or father hunger. You begin to wonder how many kids in this world suffer from father hunger, where they didn't get enough fathering. You know the DJ Howard Stern? Howard Stern is lewd and lascivious. He talks about sex all the time. You know that Howard Stern was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? He never played one song. He never sung one song. He talks every day on the radio for 4 hours. He's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. One day I saw an interview with David Letterman and Howard Stern. And David Letterman said to Howard Stern, I hear you have daddy issues. You know rapper Kendrick Lamar? Kendrick Lamar has a song called Father Time, and the hook of the song is, I've got daddy issues. Howard Stern said, yes, I have daddy issues. He suffered from father hunger. In the story that he told, David Letterman, that when he was a little boy growing up, he wanted nothing more than his father's attention. And his father would come home every day from work, sitting in his favorite chair. And Howard Stern says, little boy, I would sit right next to my daddy and I would grab him and touch him, try to get his attention. He wouldn't look at me. He would look straight ahead in his favorite chair and listen to the radio. My dad would pay no attention to me. He would listen to the radio. So as a little boy, I said to myself, if I could just get inside of that radio, if I could get inside of that radio, I would have my father's attention. And he said, if I was really good while I was inside of the radio, I'd really have his attention. At the end of the day, he took that pain and he became a rock and roll Hall of Fame DJ. That's not the story of most of the young men who I work with, who were abandoned by their father. They become gang members. And they take that rage, which is really grief, out on the community with guns. So the impact of the loss of fatherlessness on adolescent males, depression. And by the way, you've heard me talk about this before. A lot of adolescent males who are depressed, they don't look depressed, they look angry. Their depression shows up as anger and rage. Or destructive peer group affiliation like joining a gang or a hate group. Or that grief shows up as heavy substance use to cover the pain of the loss. Or that pain, that grief shows up as desertion of the next generation. Let me share with you a brief story and ask you a question. A 16-year-old girl says to her 16-year-old boyfriend, I'm pregnant. He wants to see the ultrasound. He's 16 years old. What's he hoping for? A son or a daughter? Let us chat. What's the 16-year-old boy hoping for? A son or a daughter?
Son.
Yeah, he wants a son. As the rapper Tupac Shakur says, because I want to see a part of me that was never shady. He's wanting a son. He discovers he's having a son. He's a tough guy. So he snuck and went to Lamaze classes. He didn't tell his buddies, but he went to Lamaze. He's so excited about having a son. On the day of delivery, he cuts the umbilical cord. Have you ever cut an umbilical cord? I've done it twice. Nothing feels like an umbilical cord. Done it twice. He cuts the umbilical cord. He's so excited. Was he name his son? Correct. Junior. He names the son after himself. The mother hands Junior to the father, and he hears Junior cry. He immediately hands Junior back to the mother, says, I'm going to get some milk. Junior doesn't need milk. The mother is going to nurse Junior. The father's gone for the next 3 decades. He disappeared. What happened? When he heard the sound of Junior's tears, it triggered something in him. And what it triggered is when his father deserted him. So now he deserted his son, which increases the chance that he will desert his children. On and on and on. And what about daughters when they're deserted by their fathers? How does that grief show up? There's a book called Whatever Happened to Daddy's Little Girl. It's about what happens to daughters who are deserted by their fathers. How does that grief show up? She said what they often go through as little girls is the search. There's a knock on the door. Is that my father coming to see me? The phone, is that my dad, right? She's searching for her dad. You know, when I was in London, England, I saw a group of women at midnight selling flowers. And the tour guide said, these women are Eurasians. Their fathers got their mothers pregnant during the Vietnam War. And 30 years later, these young women traveled from Vietnam to London, England, looking for fathers they never met. Here's your question. Daughters deserted by their fathers. At what age does the search end? When do they stop searching? I'm curious your thoughts. You can put them in chat.
Somebody said never, never. They all say never.
Yeah, you know, she could have kind of like a hole in her soul. Promiscuity. The book says there's often a link between daughters being deserted by their fathers and promiscuity. And what the author says, it's not so much about sex, it's about magical thinking. If I sleep with all of these people, maybe my father will determine, just find out how desirable I am, and maybe he'll come back over my house. Maybe he'll knock on my door. Dating older people, looking for father through partners. Risk of teen pregnancy. Daughters deserted by their fathers, according to the research, are 140 times more likely to have a baby as a teenager. What's her mindset? He deserted me, but I'll have a baby that'll never leave me. Daughters deserted by their fathers are 6 times more likely to be sexually abused. And as you know, there's a link between sexual abuse in girls and substance use in adolescent and adult years. And then substance use to numb the pain of the grief. We're talking about loss in adolescence, like breakups. Remember when she broke your heart? You were 15 years old and madly in love. Remember when he broke your heart? How long does it take to get over that first heartbreak in a relationship? Sometimes forever, not making the cut. I collect stories of young men who wanted to play in the NFL or the NBA to buy their mother a house. And then they didn't make it to professional sports. They started using drugs for the next 30 years to deal with that grief, or relocations, or divorce, or someone you love dies and you're grieving, or you're bullied. You know, one of the worst parts about being bullied, one of the worst parts about being bullying, it's not just the violence. It's when they isolate you from other people. You're alienated and you're grieving alone. Loss of innocence. How does that occur? The loss of childhood. It can happen if the child is sexually abused, or it can happen in separation and divorce, and you become the woman of the house or the man of the house. I work a lot with single mothers. And I say to them when they have sons, don't make them the man of the house. Let them stay a boy. You can only be a boy for 12 years, right? A teenager for 6. You've got to be a grown man for the rest of your life after age 18. Let him stay a boy. I tell single mothers, if he's a man of the house and he's 12 years old, it means he's married to you. Now, you don't know my mother, but if you knew my mother, you'd understand the statement I'm about to make. If I was 12 years old, married to my mother, I'd get high every day. That's a whole lot of pressure. You don't know my mother. Other losses in adolescence include giving up coping mechanisms. Like the drugs is what they use to help them cope. And then they meet with you and I. And we say, you need to give this up. And they grieve, they miss it. And relapse is about dealing with grief, going back to that which I missed. You know, I was working with a group of teenage girls, adolescent teenage girls, and one of the assignments was to write a goodbye letter to one of the drugs that they would choose to write about. And the letter would go something like this. Dear cocaine, dear marijuana, dear heroin, I want to thank you very much for all that you've done for me. You helped me get through childhood sexual abuse. You had helped me get through the separation, divorce of my parents. You helped me get through bullying. You helped me get through free locations, regular locations. Thank you so much. You did a lot for me. In many ways, you helped save my life. But now I'm afraid that if I keep you in my life, you might end my life. So I'm going to remove you from my life, and I know that I'll miss you. And I heard that you're cunning, baffling, and powerful. In fact, I heard that you were able to fake your own death, make me believe that you're out of my life, or that I don't really have a problem. And so I'll probably want to go back to you. But there's some things that I've discovered I can do without you. I get better grades. People trust me more. I like myself better. And even if I miss you, these are the things I'm going to do to keep you out of my life. Goodbye. Giving up the tribe. So how many of you believe that a bar is a tribe? You bet a bar is a tribe. Some people go from bar to bar to bar till they find their bar. That becomes their tribe. I have friends who have alcoholism. They can give up drinking, but they can't stay away from the bar. They can't stay away from the tribe. When they're around the tribe, they drink. Nephew tries to stay away from the gang. That's his tribe. Whenever he's no longer around them, he grieves being around them. He misses them. Whenever he goes back around them, he starts getting high again. Or the client who tells you that the only control she ever felt that she had over her life Were the calories that she put in her body. She tells you her life was chaotic. Her family was dysfunctional. They relocated frequently. The only control she had were the calories she didn't put in her body. We ask her to give her an eating disorder. She misses it because she feels like she has no control over her life. Or the teenage girl who cuts. Says, I'm not suicidal, right? It's the only time I feel human and alive. She gives up cutting. She misses it because right now she doesn't feel alive. And then losses that our client suffers. As a matter of fact, this is why I was invited to do this presentation, because there were so many losses that people experienced during COVID-19. Let us create a little list. What losses did people suffer as a result of COVID-19?
Family members, jobs, housing, independence, social life, social circle, freedom, marriages.
You know, one of the early tragedies I heard about COVID-19, one of those early tragedies is that people would go to the hospital and they couldn't hug their loved one, or they may not have been allowed to go to the hospital at all. So they weren't able to be up close during the loss. And their loved one who died often died alone. But we're so resilient, right? We're so resilient as people. So I'm going to share with you several grief models. And what I'm going to ask you to do is sort of take a moment to talk about which of these models sort of mirrors how you grieve when you suffer a loss. And we'll take a break in the middle. Are you all doing okay? You could just put a 1 in chat, the number 1 if you're doing okay right now. I can't see. I know you just came back from lunch. You ate the pterodactyl burgers. Are you all doing okay right now?
You're getting lots of ones.
Ones in chat. Fantastic. All right, here we go. Now, this model you know, developed by Dr. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. You know this model. This is one of our first grief models. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross said that, first of all, let me tell you how she developed this model. You know, like Freud developed something that was called the psychosexual stages of development. So he talked a lot about sex. Turns out that Freud had erotic fantasies towards his mother even in his 40s. These models that people develop are personal. I'll give you another example. Erickson, the stages of development. The first, he says we need food, clothing, and shelter. Guess what we learned about Erickson? When he was a boy growing up, his parents would put a lock on the refrigerator. He was deprived of food. It was personal. Food, clothing, and shelter. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was born a triplet. And when she was a little girl, one of the 3 of them died. So grief was upon her. She decided she would become a doctor. And so what she noted was that patients were dying and patients were like, and doctors wouldn't talk about it. You've seen doctors uncomfortable, like bringing bad news to us. This is what Kubler-Ross said: when a person suffers a loss, they go through these 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. The mistake that we've made is that we try to take these 5 stages, right, and apply them to death and dying. When she developed this model, it had nothing to do with death and dying. What she called this model, get this, are the 5 stages a person goes through when they get news from their doctor that they have a terminal illness like cancer. It was about news from a doctor about an illness. So see if this makes sense. Denial. Doctor walks in a room and says to the patient, you have cancer. Patient says, no, I don't. I need a third opinion. The first stage is denial when you get news of a terminal chronic illness. The next stage is anger. She called that the why me stage. Why did it happen to me? The patient is angry. The third stage is bargaining. Patient says, if you let this tumor go away, right, then I'll go to church 8 days out of a 7-day week. They start bargaining with God. Third stage is bargaining. Let this tumor go away. The fourth stage is depression. It's about dying with an illness. I'm dying of diabetes. I'm dying of cancer. I'm dying of Lou Gehrig's disease. Dying with a condition is the depression stage. And then the fifth stage is acceptance. I'm ready for whatever comes my way. It's the difference between dying of a condition and living with a condition. You know, like living with AIDS, living with cancer. There was a woman named Princess Zulu. She's from Gambia, an African woman. And she was HIV positive. And she wrote a book called I Refuse to Die Before I'm Buried. I refuse to die before I'm buried. It's about living with a condition. See, this doesn't fit death and dying. Because as it pertains to death and dying, grief doesn't begin until after you accept the loss. As it pertains to death and dying, grief begins in the fifth stage, acceptance. And I believe, as it pertains to death and dying, there's another step. It's called the messed up stage. You see, you accept the loss, but you're all messed up. So let me share this with you. A number of years ago, and you've heard me talk about this, I was headed out of town to a Commonwealth of the United States called the U.S. Virgin Islands to give a speech. And old-time buddies told me that if you're going out of town, you should let your kids know that you're thinking about them while you're out of town. It's a good idea. I'll be in the Virgin Islands for a week. So I left a note on my son's computer. He was 6 years old at the time. Daddy will be home next Wednesday. My son died the day before I arrived home. He died on that Tuesday. So I was all messed up. I didn't think I could do my work ever again. As a matter of fact, my friends, I thought about never returning home. I thought about staying on an island, drinking tequila every night and eating key lime pie and dancing. I saw Americans on that island drinking all night tequila, right? And they were eating key lime pie and dancing. Then I remembered I was a drug abuse counselor. And what we taught our clients for years, play the tape forward. Play the tape forward. So I played the tape forward. And what I realized is that I could get drunk on the island every night. But when I woke up the next morning, my son would still have died. So I made it back home. And four things helped that allowed me to continue doing this work. I'm telling you, I didn't think I could ever give a speech like this again. So a little while after my son died, I called my godmother. And I said, my son died. And she says, come over. Now I'll answer the question that you've been asking me since you were 12 years old. I've been asking my godmother the same question since I was 12 years old. And the question was, how come you never turn out the lights in your living room? No matter what time I drove past her house, she always lived within a block of me. The lights in her living room were always on. 1 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, lights always on. So come over now and answer the question. She had a son who died the year before she met me, who looked like me. Go figure. So when she met me, I was actually the friends. Her other son was one of my best friends. So as soon as she saw me, oh, he's my godson. She had a son that died the year before she met me, who looked like me. He's my godson. She said, Mark, you ever do anything peculiar? I said, yeah. So since my son died, she said that, I said, me and my wife, we sleep, like we keep a space open in the middle of the bed. I told her that every morning, or at least when he woke up early, he'd get out of his bed and he'd climb in bed with us and he'd be in bed with his mother and father. And there was a space there after he died. We've left that space open for him for 22 years. We still keep a space in the middle. for our son. And this is what my godmother told me. She said, Mark, you remain as close to your child in death as you ever were in life. They're still your children, even when they die. You know how I know? Because when we visit the funeral cemetery, my wife brings a shovel to get rid of the remains of the geese left out there on the headstone, and some scissors to trim the grass off the headstone. She's still his mother. He died 22 years ago. She said, Mark, sometime your child will show up and visit you in your dreams spiritually. She said, the reason I never cut off the lights in the living room is so that if he shows up to visit, if it's late at night, it won't be dark. If it's late at night, it won't be dark. And I don't have to worry about him tripping over the living room furniture. I knew she understood. And for about a year, every week, we would have a group therapy session of 2. She coached me through all that acute pain. The second thing that happened was that it was time for me to renew my automobile insurance. I have a broker. I don't need an automobile insurance broker. I can go online and get Geico. But he was 70 when I was 30, a wise older man. You know why there's so many young people shooting other people in Milwaukee and Chicago? These young men. Because they don't have older men in their lives to affirm them, and they're hurting. My insurance broker would tell me I was smart. He affirmed me. And you see, I knew that after my son died, that he and I would have a group therapy session of 2. You see, 6 months before my son died, right? His daughter died. Postpartum psychosis. After her baby was born, she experienced psychosis. And she jumped off a roof to her death. I knew we were going to have a group therapy session of 2. And I told him what happened. I said, Walter, I said, the worst part is at my son's funeral, he was the love of my life, my son. I couldn't cry. He said, Mark, love is eternal. And it's okay for a man to cry. He said, I've cried every day since my daughter died. I hadn't cried in years. My father died, I didn't cry. I was taught that men didn't cry. So I renewed my insurance. And I put the insurance policy in the glove compartment. And I started to cry. And 30 years of tears came out of me. The first thing I did was I looked at the rearview mirror because I wanted to see how I looked. I hadn't cried in so long, I became, how do I look crying? But none of that mattered. I got my tears back. Did you know that women outlive men all over the world? And that one of the reasons women outlive men is because they have more permission to cry. You know, if I could get away with it, I'll keep an onion on me at all times and squeeze it 10 times a day just so I could cry. That really helped me. The third thing is at my son's funeral, 250 certified addictions counselors showed up. And as you know, as a profession, we are one hugging profession. I think the reason we hug so much as drug counselors is because some of the first counselors came out of Alcoholics Anonymous, where they give hugs. And so they brought the hugs into the profession. 250 certified addictions counselors showed up at my son's funeral. I hugged all 250 of them. Have you ever hugged 250 people? It nearly killed me, but it breathed life into me. And we did the unthinkable. You know, the philosopher said that it's better to have loved than lost, to never to have loved at all. So I felt so much love from all those hugs. We had another child. He's 20 years old on a university campus. I never would have had that second child if it were not for all of those hugs, all of those 12-step hugs. The fourth thing that happened is that after our son died, we went to a conference with other bereaved parents, and there was a woman who spoke. And her words changed my life. This is what she said. She said, grief is not about forgetting. It's about remembering with less pain. Grief is not about forgetting. It's about remembering with less pain. She said, when you suffer a loss, you don't want to forget, because that what you try to forget has a way of haunting you. You want to hurt less. And the one way you can hurt less when you suffer a loss is to be free to tell your story as often as you feel you need to tell your story. And eventually, the pain will become less. I can tell you 22 years later, I still grieve. My pain is so much less. It's not about forgetting, it's about remembering with less pain. We ought to give people permission to share their story. I want to talk about one more little model, and then we'll take a break. Are you all doing okay? Put a one in chat if you're doing okay. Talk about one more little model, then we'll take a break. Just want to make sure everybody's doing okay. If I could see you, I can look in your eyes and tell how you're doing. But I can't see you. You can see me.
Looks like people are doing pretty good, Mark.
Fantastic. You know the other thing that's happening, Amy?
What?
That big steak and pterodactyl burger that they ate for lunch is starting to wear off now. They're waking up. Waking up, Amy. So this is a model written by a man by the name of David Kessler, who actually wrote books with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And he talks about what's called the 6th stage of grief. Now, you notice the first 5 stages, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. He added the 6th stage, finding meaning in the loss. Finding meaning, David Kessler says, can help reduce some of the pain of grief, of your grief. Meaning helps us find a path forward. Meaning helps us make sense of grief. Meaning, if we can find meaning in our loss, can help decrease some of the pain of grief. So, my friends, Amy said to those of you who are hearing me for the first time, you're in for a treat. Mark has been with us for years. He's written many, many books. People sometimes read my biographical sketch. Let me lean in for dramatic effect. I'm almost my biographical sketch. Not quite, but I'm almost that guy. I'm almost that guy. But when my son died, I was so angry because I'm almost that guy. When my son died, I was in the Virgin Islands helping people. I've helped people since I was 16 years old. Why did my son die? That was the question. Why did he die at 6 years old? There's a Chinese proverb that says it's unnatural for gray hair to bury black hair. So I asked God that question, why did my son die for 10 years? And 10 years later, I got the answer. I was driving on the south side of Chicago and said, oh my God, here's the answer. I pulled the car over and listened to the answer. My son lived for 6 years. As a matter of fact, what we wrote on his headstone, he played every day of his life. I just say to my son, nobody can play every day of life. My son played every day of his life. So here's the response that came to me. That God so loved my son that he allowed him to play every day of his life and then go right to heaven. He played every day of his life from my spiritual perspective and went right to heaven. My son was never called the N-word. He was never discriminated against. He never had to pay student loan debt or pay off a mortgage, right? Or get fired, right? He never even had to live through COVID-19, right? That was my answer. I felt a little more relieved. Finding meaning. Gratitude. So your grandmother died and she was 80. And even though you were grieving, you were happy that she was in your life all those years. A lesson learned. You know, one of the works that we do, one of the works that you and I do as co-occurring disorder specialists is we help our clients develop healthy relationships and recovery, right? So what I do with my clients when relationships fall apart is I help them figure out the lessons learned from that relationship. I'm like Oprah Winfrey, who says that a relationship is holy as long as you learn the lessons that that relationship were there to teach you, right? And when our clients get insight into the lessons, they're still grieving, but it gives them meaning. I went through this relationship so I can learn these things to be better in relationships. Or taking their grief and turning it into a purpose or a cause. or organ donation, like the mother who had a son die, but his organs were used to save the life of 6 people. It gives us some relief. Doesn't bring her son back, but it provides a sense of meaning. Or contributing to a cause. You might recognize the woman on the screen, Farrah Fawcett, the supermodel, one of the originals, Charlie's Angels. And she had cancer. And people are taking all these pictures of her, posters all over the world. And Farrah Fawcett signed contracts that said that every dime that's made off of my image, every picture, every movie, every rerun of Charlie's Angels has to go towards cancer research. She took her pain and she turned it into a cause, finding meaning. So here's a story. So my godmother, who kept the lights on for her son that looked like me, died of cancer, lung cancer. She smoked a pack of cigarettes a day. Now, a number of years ago, I was asked to be the chair of the Clinical Issues Committee for NADAC, the National Association of Drug Abuse Counselors. We did some great work on that committee. We actually were developing standards for behavioral health treatment for clients who are LGBTQ. I'm telling you, this was important work we were doing. Another thing we did was we put some work into like trying to get insurance companies to reimburse for clinical supervision, because that which gets billed gets done. We also did some work, wrote some articles and did some webinars on counseling young adults, 18 to 25 years old. Great work, great work. So when my chairpersonship was up, I asked the president of NADAC's board, why did you choose me? How did you choose me to be the chair of that committee? She said, one day I attended a seminar and you were talking about how we need to treat cigarette smoking just like we treat other drugs. She said, you said that cigarettes kill more people than all illicit drugs and HIV combined, and we take our clients on cigarette breaks. We would never take them on a crack or a heroin break. You spoke so vehemently on a belief that we should address cigarettes just like we address methamphetamines and crack. I called one of my best friends, my godmother's son. And I said, from my perspective, your mother didn't die in vain. If your mother didn't die, we never would have developed a committee. I wouldn't have been out to be the chair of that committee. We never would have tried to create standards for LGBTQ client populations. We never would have did those position papers and those articles and workshops on working with emerging adults, right? And we certainly wouldn't have put efforts into trying to get the clinical supervision hour paid for. Meaning. Or you might recognize this image here from a movie called Cooley High, film based in a high school in 1965. The actor on the right played the role of a basketball player from Cooley High. On the far right, the guy next to him in the glasses, they were best friends. In the movie, the basketball player was killed by a gang member. And his best friend, in response to the death of his best friend, left Chicago and moved to LA and became a screenwriter. I've known gang members that become doctors and lawyers after one of their fellow gang members is killed, finding meaning in the loss or finding God. After our son died, we took a trip to Tennessee, my wife and I. And while I was speaking in Tennessee, she started going back to church. And she's been actively involved in her church for the last 22 years. Or at peace now. You had a loved one who suffered, and now you find meaning because you believe they're at peace now. Here's a story. We'll take a break in a few minutes. Nona Gay, the daughter of singer Marvin Gaye, was in a relationship with Prince. And after Prince died, she said, I think Prince is in a better place now. Up there with all those who died early. Michael Jackson, my dad, Marvin Gaye, they're up there jamming. Could you imagine a concert with Prince, Michael Jackson, and Marvin Gaye. He's in a better place now. The rapper Tupac Shakur, he knew that he wouldn't be alive long. He felt he would die early, but he didn't want his mother to hurt too bad. So he had about 4 songs that began with the lyrics, Dear Mama, Don't Cry. So here are the lyrics to a song from a song called Thug Mansion, written by Tupac Shakur. Dear Mama, don't cry. Your baby boy's doing good. Tell my homies I'm in heaven and they ain't got hoods. No food stamps in heaven, right? No poverty in heaven. No ghettos in heaven. Seen a show with Marvin Gaye last night. It had me shook. Drinking peppermint snaps with Jackie Wilson and Sam Cooke. Then some lady named Billie Holiday sang Sitting There Kicking It with Malcolm till the day came. He wanted his mother to know I'll be all right. His image was that he'd be in heaven. Listening to Billie Holiday sing, or he would be surrounded by Marvin Gaye and Sam Cooke. I have 2:05. Let's take a 15-minute break. I'll see you at 2:20. Thank you so much. I'll see you in 15 minutes.
Thanks, Mark. We'll see you in
Thank
15.
you.
I'm ready when you are, Mark.
Okay, are people just about back?
I'm here.
Okay, that's all we need.
We're with you.
That's it. Thank you so much. So, let's take a moment, if we would. Let us chat. Like if we were there live and I could see you, then I could talk with you during the break, and I can't see you. So, so I want to know if this has any value so far. So, would you put in chat, from your perspective, what's the most important thing we've talked about so far in this workshop? What's the most important thing we talked about so far in this workshop from your perspective?
Somebody said meaning, where grief comes from, finding meaning in grief, stages of grief. Grief is normal and unavoidable. You guys are typing so fast I can barely keep up. How powerful your own story is in regards to grief and finding hope. All of our clients are grieving something in their lives, and to heal, they need to find meaning. That eventually you'll have acceptance. The importance of connection throughout our lifetime. Unhealthy ways individuals dealing with grief. We are in this together, finding acceptance. You only avoid grief if you avoid love. That grief is healthy, part of life. And whoa, you guys are just talking. It's bouncing all over. Let's see. The grief is healthy and part of life and needed because it ultimately has a purpose.
We'll do maybe one or two more. Thank you, Amy.
Okay, sure. Finding meaning when you lose someone you thought you couldn't live without. Understanding grief and knowing what someone is really going through when a parent is no longer in someone's life. People should feel free to tell their story as often as they need, and that touch or hugs are therapeutic if safely. How it actually starts at the time we are born.
Yeah, how about that? Okay, welcome back and
okay.
Continue.
Welcome back, everyone.
So far, I've shared with you two models. The first by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and then Kessler's model, Finding Meaning. The third model, in Understanding Grief, is by Josefowski. He says, when we suffer loss, we go through these 5 stages. The first stage is called impact. The initial stage where we process the reality of loss while working to maintain our physiological needs for food, water, and rest. You ever notice that sometimes when people suffer a loss, they don't eat, they don't get sleep? So go get something. When's the last time you had something to eat? Drink some water. Second stage is chaos. You know what I think happens in that second stage? So we talked about the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stage, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, as if they were like linear. But I think what happens with those stages, it's more circular. You don't go through them in order like this. You can experience denial 1 minute, acceptance the next. Denial 1 minute, anger the next. Anger 1 minute, bargaining the next. It's kind of circular. So you might be confused after suffering a loss. That's why sometimes when we're grieving, we need to write stuff down because it can affect our memory. Adaptation being the third stage. We learn to adapt to life without the loved one, and we seek connections to others through support systems of the grievers in work, school, church, and we develop new roles for ourselves. The fourth stage is called equilibrium. We attain stability and balance in life and are able to consider self-retention without our loved one. And then the fifth stage, according to Josefowski, is post-traumatic growth. A metamorphosis occurs, and you emerge reshaped from the loss, developing more potential, greater spirituality, greater altruism, self-awareness, and appreciation of life. In other words, with this model, she suggests that some people take their life to a greater height after they suffered a loss. If I can give you a couple examples. Rosie O'Donnell played in a movie called A League of Their Own. along with Madonna. They were about a women's baseball team during World War II. And she says, we became friends right away, her and Madonna, because what they realized was they were the only girls that they knew, when they were girls, that is, who lost their mother to death before they were 10 years old. So we would talk about our mothers. And she said, Rosie O'Donnell said, that Madonna said to her that her performances wouldn't have been nearly as good, nearly as sensual, her performances, if her mother were alive. Because her mother died when she was so young, she didn't have a mother saying, don't do that when you perform. Danielle Steele, the great writer Danielle Steele, husband died when she was 50 years old. She started writing at age 50 to deal with his death. That was the first book she'd ever written after he died. And every book she's ever written became a New York Times bestseller, Post-Traumatic Growth. You take your life to greater heights because of the loss. The tier model. You accept the reality of the loss. You experience the pain of the loss. You adjust to the new environment with what you've lost. And then you reinvent a new reality for yourself. You ever known somebody who gets divorced and they still wear their wedding band? Right? They're in pain, they're still wearing their wedding band. Then one day, they take off the wedding band and they're ready to reinvent a new reality for themselves. I'm single now. They've actually been single for 2 years. But it's at that 2-year period that they're ready to reinvent a new life for themselves. Backer, Hammond, and Russell. They say when we experience loss, we go through three stages: shock and numbness. It's like you go to the hospital and the doctor says your loved one has died. You say, what? You can't believe it. You're shocked and you're numb. And then you go through a period of intense grief. You want her to come back. You want them to come back. Or yearning. This happens a lot when someone breaks up with another person in a relationship. They might yearn for them to come back, followed by reintegration back into society. So we've talked about these 5 models. Let's review them. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, person gets news from a doctor they have a terminal illness, like cancer. Now anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. David Kessler says, no, one more step, finding meaning in the loss to ease some of the pain of the loss. Joseph Foskey says, we suffer a loss and we hurt, but we can also have post-traumatic growth. We can grow as a result of the loss. The tier model, we accept the loss, we experience the pain of the loss, we adjust to the new environment, and then we reinvent a new reality for ourselves. Becker, Hammond, and Russell, shock and numbness, intense grief, and then yearning, followed by reintegration back into society. What we'd like to ask you to do is put in chat which of these models most mirrors how you grieve when you suffer a loss. Is it more like the way Kubler-Ross described it, or Kessler, or Joseph Foskey, or the tier model? Becker, Hammond, and Russell. When you suffer a loss, which of these models come closest to mirroring how you tend to grieve?
Let me get over to the chat here.
Thank you.
Oops. Oh, okay. Hold on, Mark. I'm coming back to you here. For some reason my chat. Oh, here. Okay. I've got a few tier models. I've got one Kessler. How do you say the J?
Yeah, I'm
Joseph
looking at. I don't. Yeah, Joseph Foskey.
Foskey. Kubler-Ross, Kessler. Actually, a little from each. Somebody said Kessler tier model. Some tier and some Becker.
So what you all are suggesting, we just did a little experiment here, that grief really is individualized. Everyone grieves different. Part of our job is to accept how people grieve and give themselves, to help them give themselves permission to grieve how they grieve. There are factors that complicate grief. And oh, by the way, even though I said earlier that grief was automatic and natural and not a DSM-5 diagnosis, and I said that most people who suffer loss don't need therapy, they need support, there's something called complicated grief. And when someone experiences complicated grief, they may not be able to work as a result of the grief. They may develop mental illness because of the grief, or a substance use disorder because of the grief, or they may become suicidal in grief. There are factors that increase the risk of complicated grief. Number one, the person may have a style of avoidance as a major coping mechanism. There are whole families out there that suffer losses, and everybody avoids dealing with it. Number two, adaptation of a cultural norm, which encourages us to grieve as quickly as possible and not remember. Remember, I mentioned earlier that grief is not about forgetting, it's about remembering with less pain. If you're in a world that says, forget it, aren't you over that by now? Your grief will grow underground and become complicated. What happened to grief rituals? Remember, like we were in that 20-year war in Afghanistan, Iraq and Afghanistan? And the politicians made sure that no news station could show the caskets on television. They didn't want us to see what was going on. What was happening, though, in all of our wars, people die on the battlefield. They have a funeral, go right to battle. No time to grieve. You see, the ancients in every culture had elaborate ongoing rituals to deal with loss. These rituals have disappeared. Loss of connection to the ancestors. The ancestors had the rituals. Disintegration of the family. You know, 100 or 200 years ago, when immigrants came to America by way of Ellis Island, and they were really poor coming in from Europe, it might be like 20 people sleeping in small apartments, right? In tight dwellings. But if you suffered a loss back then, there were 20 relatives around. You knew that there was instant built-in support. Today, families are so spread out. Look at my family. I got a brother in Indiana, a sister in Minneapolis, Minnesota, another sister in Virginia Beach. If we suffer a loss, you have to wait for cousins to come in, to fly in, people to come in from other countries. The family is more spread out, disintegrated. And then they eat a meal and everybody goes their separate way. No support around grief. Technology. Everything is quicker now. I was in Brooklyn, New York at a funeral. It was a drive-by funeral, The parking lot was full. No one else could enter the funeral home. They said, go to the pillar, type in the name of the deceased, and you'll see the casket on the screen. Drive-by funeral. Oh, the world of work. You and I don't work for the same organization, but I know what your policy procedure manual reads. If there's a death in your family, it says you can only grieve for 3 days. Get back to work or take vacation time. And guess what? Unless your coworkers can prove that they're your fifth cousin on your mother's side of the family, they can't even grieve with you. Get back to work. Rituals have disappeared. And when grief rituals disappear, then grief can become complicated. We're talking about factors that complicate grief. The grieving person already has a psychiatric condition which makes them vulnerable to complicated grief. Like they're already experienced depression and then they suffer a loss. Or they're already numb from their social substance use and then they suffer a loss. You know, my friends, most people don't like funerals. People with addictions really don't like funerals because they already often have abandonment issues and then there's a loss on top of it. Let me drink more. The person has attachment disorder and they suffer another loss, or psychosis, or borderline personality disorder, which is primarily trauma, grief, and loss, or traumatic stress disorder, like PTSD. A soldier comes back from battle. Not only are they having nightmares and flashbacks and bad dreams, which is a part of PTSD, they also are grieving because some of their friends in the military were killed. They're grieving and they suffer from PTSD, both. Or they might have complex trauma. They've had years as a child growing up where they were neglected or abandoned and placed from group home to group home. And then they suffer more losses, right? On top of all their childhood loss. That can complicate grief, increasing the risk of a substance use disorder, increasing the risk of mental illness, right? Or historical trauma. You know, I was talking to a group of Native Americans during COVID-19. And what they share with me was losses they were experiencing during COVID-19 reminded them of the stories their ancestors shared about massacres hundreds of years ago. There's a type of trauma that's common in big cities that have lots of gun violence. I'm calling that 24/7, 365 terror, where you're living in a neighborhood where there's gun violence and you're afraid you can get shot at any moment, right? You never get relief from the trauma. The way 24/7, 365 terror differs from PTSD. In order to be diagnosed with PTSD, you're someplace that's traumatic like the battlefield or prison. And you return from battle or prison, and it's when you return that you're having the nightmares and the flashbacks and the bad dreams, once you're no longer in the traumatic environment. But with 24/7, 365 terror, you're always in a traumatic space. So you're dealing with your own trauma, and you're also grieving that you had 3 of your buddies killed in gang violence. I work with lots of young people like that. They're dealing with their own trauma while grieving the 5 buddies that were murdered to gun violence. You know how they deal with that? They get high every day in order to cope. Unspeakable losses, like you have a loved one that died, but they died of AIDS. And so AIDS carries stigma, so you don't talk about it. Or suicide.
Because it's a training about grief and loss, and I'm pretty sure I have that pretty under wraps.
I don't know who was just speaking, but that was profound what you just shared.
I'm looking for it, Mark.
Yeah. Or for example, you live in a small town that has a lot of homophobia and your lover dies, right? You're in a lesbian relationship, a gay relationship. Who do you talk to about it? Unspeakable loss complicates grief. Or ambivalent losses. How about this? Most of our clients with substance use disorders or co-occurring disorders have been traumatized in childhood. The person who traumatized them happens to be a father or mother or an older sibling who they love. And that person dies and they're feeling a couple emotions, anger and rage, plus grief. Or extreme guilt or layers of guilt, like you blame yourself for someone's death. That can complicate grief. Or multiple losses. Here's the story. So I have a good friend who I played high school and college basketball with, who admired his big brother. His big brother taught him how to play baseball, basketball, football. He loved his big brother. One day when my friend was 9 years old, his big brother was in an alley shooting a gun, and no bullets came out. So the big brother looked down the barrel of the gun to find out what was going on with the gun. He pulled the trigger, and the big brother accidentally shot and killed himself. A month after the big brother accidentally shot and killed himself, my friend's father left the family. His father just walked out of the family and dated a woman that was half his wife's age. That's how he dealt with his loss. My friend had a middle brother who was a quarterback in football, dealt with the loss of his big brother in the absence of his father by taking the drug acid. The year was 1969. Now it's 2023. He's still on the same acid trip today. By the way, some people who get diagnosed with schizophrenia might actually be in a drug-induced psychosis. His middle brother never came back from that drug-induced psychosis. Here's my good friend. Went from being the baby of the family to the man of the house. One brother and drug-induced psychosis. Another brother accidentally killed himself. Father gone. When we were in our 20s, my good friend fell in love with who he described as the most beautiful woman in the world. He said that one day they were at Gibson Steakhouse, and there were 50 men in the steakhouse, and they were all cutting their steak with their knives. And when she walked in, they were so distracted that all 50 of them cut their fingers with their steak knife at the same time. My friends, I can tell you that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I've seen her. I'm just saying. Anyway, he was so in love with her. And she left him for another man. And he started drinking. Then after she left, he dated a woman for a decade. I know he loved her, but he tried not to fall in love with her because he was still grieving the woman that had left him. But I know he loved the next woman. And one day he turned on the radio and he heard that she was murdered in her apartment. And he started using cocaine along with the alcohol. So all of these losses, oldest brother accidentally killed himself, middle brother strung out on acid, right? Father left the family when he was 9 years old. The love of his life left him. And then his girlfriend of a decade was killed in her apartment. So he and I have talked a lot. He even shared with me of all his losses, the one that hurt the most. I'm curious what you think. Of those losses that he suffered, which one do you think hurt him the most? Would you put that in chat?
Hey, Mark, also, did you see, I don't think you can read the question. Somebody put in the chat, do you believe you can find meaning in losing a parent to suicide?
Yes, you can become a specialist that helps people prevent suicide. As a matter of fact, I'm glad they asked the question. I started doing these seminars on grief for my own sanity. After my son died, I started teaching on grief. You bet. You bet you can.
Okay, to your other question, let's see. Somebody said the girlfriend that left him, his father leaving the family, his brother, his father, his girlfriend who was murdered, the girlfriend that left him, his father, the woman he loved, father, loss of childhood, and father.
Okay, so check this out. So I would see the son with his father, my friend. Father was always so rude. So one day I said to my good friend, I said, man, I know it's never okay to get inside of a father-son relationship. You're a much better man than your father because you're so kind and so nice. And you're so nice to your father. And I see how he treats you. He said of all of his losses, the one that hurt the most was his father disappearing on the family. He said because all the rest he could explain it. His brother's death was an accident. His brother started using acid, it was the coke. The girl, the one he's so in love, she had her choice. She could just leave. Her father didn't want him to her to marry him anyway, he said. And then the girlfriend, he could do nothing about that, but it was the father deserting the family. Unsure your loved one is actually dead. So they went to war and nobody ever found the body. Or remember September 11, 2001, they didn't find everybody. And when you're unsure, that can complicate grief. Sudden death, right? Happen quickly, like COVID-19 loss. Unacknowledged losses. Let me whisper for dramatic effect. When my son died, you'd be shocked how many women came up to me and said, I had a miscarriage. I said, how come you're whispering? Because a miscarriage is an unacknowledged loss. Like stillborn is an unacknowledged loss. And yet these women would sometimes cry when they tell me they had miscarriages. Why were they crying? They were grieving. Sometimes you can have a child taken away by child welfare And no one acknowledges that, right? Unacknowledged losses. So I learned to say to women who had miscarriages, and I could clearly see they were hurting, my condolences. Say, oh my God, no one said that to me. They would say something like, you're young enough to have another, right? You see, when my son died, we received 50 books on grief. I read them all, and for my own sanity, I became a grief specialist. 50 plants arrived in the mail after my son died. 50 plants. I gave away 49. I kept the cactus. Right? And over 250 condolences cards. Every 4 or 5 years, I read those cards again, right? But yet, when I talk to women who have miscarriages or stillborn, or child welfare takes her kids because of her addiction or mental illness, no plants, no books, no cards of condolence. Unacknowledged losses can complicate grief. Think about miscarriage. Today, you can look at an ultrasound in 4D. Remember back in the day when every ultrasound looked like unmolded clay? Now you can look at an ultrasound and say, well, he looks just like his grandfather, beard and all, right? And nobody processes it. So her grief goes underground, which can complicate grief. First-degree grief seekers can complicate grief. You were tortured, you never had to talk about it, or you tortured someone, or you feel you caused someone else to die, or you witnessed death firsthand and it's hard to talk about it. That can complicate grief. Or no time to grieve. You're so busy. You have no time to grieve. Language can complicate grief. Look at the language we use to describe death. She died of cardiac failure, respiratory failure, kidney failure. She lost her battle with cancer. My #1 sports anchor of all time was Stuart Scott. And Stuart Scott had cancer, and he died ultimately. This is what he said. I said, I'm not losing. I'm still here. I'm fighting. I'm winning. I'm not losing. When you die, that does not mean that you lost the cancer. You beat cancer by how you live, why you live, and the manner in which you live. You know, Princess Zulu said, I refuse to die before I'm buried. Let's take a moment to talk about the characteristics of effective grief counselors, what grief counselors do. When they talk with their clients who suffer the loss, they demonstrate good listening and basic counseling skills. Let me suggest this to you. If you're working with clients who suffer the loss, maybe they were downsized at work. Maybe their spouse, their partner left them when they were in recovery. Not when they were using, but in recovery, right? If you only have good listening skills, you know how to nod your head to let people know that you hear them in their pain. You'll help a lot of people in grief. Boundaries. My wife had a boss, and her boss's wife divorced him. So he started like doing support groups for women who just lost their spouse, their partner, to divorce, separation, or death. On a Friday night at 7:30, these support groups with these women. And massage from him was a part of the therapy. Boundaries. Effective grief counselors view grief as natural. They're slow to label as pathological. There's no medicine for grief. Depression, yeah. Not grief. It's natural and automatic. The ability to discuss their own losses. So years ago, we had an aunt that died, and my oldest sister said, Mark, will you pick me up and bring me to the funeral, drive me to the funeral? When I made it to her house, she was doing something really peculiar. She was cooking. I said, why are you cooking? So Mark, remember when we were young and we would have funerals and the old people would stay at home and they would cook? I said, I remember. She said, we're the old people now. Do you know what happens when you become the old people? Somebody dies every year, right? So what I'm talking about It's not necessarily the ability to talk about your losses with your client, although sometimes I do, to normalize their pain, especially if they have a child that died. But just in your own life, if you can talk about it in your own life, then it becomes easier when you have to do the work with clients. Ability to talk about God. Okay. My friends, I'm almost my biographical sketch. I'm almost that guy. Not quite. Almost. When my son died, I was in a Commonwealth of the United States called the Virgin Islands, helping people. So my friends, when my son died, I was angry with God. And my holiest relatives, everybody got an extra holy relative. You know, the ones who think it's a local call to God for them and long distance for everybody else. They're holier than holy. Local call to God for them, long distance for everyone else. Don't get mad at God. Don't get mad at God. They were trying to bring my grief underground. And finally, I talked to a 12-step sponsor, an unlettered scholar. He's about 80 years old. And here's what he said. He said, Mark, you ever thought you had a relationship with somebody, a friendship, and you all had one falling out and you never heard from them again? I said, yeah. That's not a relationship. He said, the relationship is only real if it can handle some ups and some downs. A relationship is only real if it can have some ups and downs. If it can't handle any downs, that's not a real relationship. Real relationships have to handle ups and downs. And he said to me, if it's true for our relationship with people, then why can't it be true for our relationship with God? If God is as big as we say God is, how come God can't handle our little anger? And God handled my anger. So I'm the guy who gets the calls from people who say, my daughter died and I'm mad at God. I roll up my sleeve, let's talk about it. That sponsor said God can handle my little anger. Ability to individualize their work and no two people grieve the same. So to provide pills for grief, you can provide pills for schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Depression, not grief. It's natural and automatic. And then sometimes we challenge clients, especially when they blame themselves for losses. But it's important to support them first. Support before challenge. Good grief counselors listen. They are emotionally present. They assist clients in expressing their feelings. They normalize those feelings. Anyone who suffered a loss like you might feel like you feel. It's normal to feel how you feel. Allow clients to show their feelings. So you're meeting with a client or a peer, and they're crying while talking about a loss. When did you pass them the clinics? But you put your response in chat. They're crying. Is they talking with you about their loss? When do you slide them the box of Kleenex?
Mark, also, just so you know, there's a comment in the chat section too that just says, Mark, would you be willing to, would you be willing to talk and provide more information to that person asking about suicide of a parent? You could help that person more than you know.
Yes. So and Amy, I'm not sure if my email address is there, but I'll give it now.
Okay, hold on. I can type while you put in. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So it's on the mark, ONTHEMARK, the number 25 at AOL.com. On the mark 25 at AOL.com. Let's take a moment to talk about my email address. Of course, I have AOL. I talked to you all about that because I have abandonment issues, right? But the number 25, that's my father's number when he played high school basketball. And every time I type in my email address, I think about my father and how the good times we had, the great memories, right? Every time I type my email, every day I think about my father. Grief is not about forgetting. It's about remembering with less pain. There's a song from my youth called Only the Good Die Young. So my grandmother was such a great person. She died. My grandfather, my father, my uncle. So my You know, my what are you when you have these accounts, my email address account, are the initials of my grandfather, my grandmother, my father, and my uncle. And every time I go into my emails, I think about it. Good grief counselors. Also, did they put a response in chat? Is it when you? Yeah,
They
which one?
did. Let's see. You asked about the Kleenex. Somebody said never. Somebody said I don't. Somebody said never. Somebody said right away. Somebody said never. Somebody said I wait for the person to ask for a Kleenex, and
Yeah.
I explain I don't want to shut down their tears.
Yeah.
Someone wrote the Kleenex would be in plain sight for them
Yeah.
to grab if they chose, and then they wait for the client to ask for a Kleenex.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think you know, the ones like around wait for them to ask, they're in clear sight is really good because if I hand them to you too soon, what you might read in that is he doesn't want me to cry. Look at how quickly he handed me those. But if they're out there in clear sight, they can just grab it. Good grief counselors listening non-judgmentally and with acceptance. In other words, go back to number 5. I know how to sit with people's tears these days. We can sit. They let their genuine concern and care show. They encourage the client to talk about the loss at their own pace if they choose to. They provide data about the grieving process. That's why I share with you about 5 different models of grief, because no two people grieve the same. Help their clients tap into natural resources for support. There's only 20 good therapists in the whole world, and I'm talking to 19 of them today. If grief is really natural and automatic, then that means we ought to be referring people to talk with their siblings about their loss. Or if their siblings are unhealthy to talk to, their 12-step group or their friends, or unconditionally accepting friends or their rabbi or their priest. Pay attention to the impact of previous losses on current losses. So you might experience a loss today, which triggers memories of past losses. We pay attention to those things for those that we serve. Pay attention to events happening in the larger society and how they affect clients. So, parents who live in those towns where they have school shootings, every time there's a school shooting, it triggers memories of what they experienced in their town. We should be aware of that. Encourage clients to be patient with themselves. Help with thoughts and thought patterns which may complicate grief. You know, 3 words that complicate grief? 4 words, it's my fault. Self-blame can complicate grief. And then, of course, helping clients turn their pain into purpose. Someone says if someone's parents committed suicide, yeah, we can turn it into a cause. I've known people whose parents overdosed and died off of heroin. And you know what their kids are doing? Narcan distribution to help save others. So Viktor Frankl said that for most people, their purpose comes out of pain. So we can help people turn their pain of grief into a cause. Like the attitude that one takes towards unavoidable suffering. Now, if I must suffer, can I turn it into a cause? Like the woman whose daughter died in a car accident, intoxicated motorist, she started MAD, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, taking the pain and turning it into a cause or meaningful work. Like me, I speak on grief. Never would have did this. And then I suffered my loss. Or by providing love or taking a stand. Stand might be that I think we should have safe injection sites to reduce overdose deaths. Or helping other people. Taking the pain of your grief and turning it into a purpose or a cause. Or keeping memories alive. Here's your question. What are some ways your average everyday person, when they suffer a loss of a loved one, keep memories alive? I'll start the list. You drive on the expressway and you see a reef. Usually when you see that reef on the expressway, it's because people had a loved one that died there and they go plant these reefs in order to remember. What are some things that average everyday people do to remember when they've suffered a loss? Any response there, Amy?
Yep. Some people said that they talk about them, balloon release, photos, look at pictures, share
That's beautiful
stories
stuff.
about them.
This is beautiful stuff.
Look for cardinals, which are a sign of love and being near. I'm sorry if I'm missing part of the comments. They're just going so fast. Light a candle every year for family gathering for past family members. Plant a tree. Listen to their favorite songs.
Yeah, this is
Music, spread
beautiful.
ashes.
Yeah, this is beautiful stuff. And yeah, and funny that Freud said natural grief was like 6 months to a year, which is not true. Some people grieve the rest of their life. They just don't hurt as much. But you can light this candle and you can release those balloons. For 33 years, you can do these things for forever. So some people keep memories alive by remembering ways their loved one left an imprint on them, telling stories about loved ones to the next generation, weaving interests or values of loved ones into your life, staying linked through a possession, keeping a place for a loved one during ceremonies, visiting grave sites, Memorial Day weekend celebration, for example. So I discovered that as I mentioned, the ancestors from every culture have these elaborate rituals to grieve. In Africa, they have what's called libations, where you take something living like a plant and you pour something in it pure like water during sacred ceremonies like Kwanzaa. And as you pour the water into the plant, the people there, they call out the names of the ancestors to remember the ancestors. In some cultures, they have what's called the feast to celebrate. In Jewish culture, they have what's called Shiva. Anyone with us today familiar with Shiva? You can tell us about Shiva. Shiva, I like Shiva even much more than I like what's called the repast. So in my family, when someone dies, they cook food and you eat the food following the funeral, and everybody go in their separate ways. With Shiva in Jewish culture, loved ones might come together for a week. They may bring you food for a week, help you clean the house, spend time with you for a whole week, right? They may be telling stories about the loved one that died, etc. Judaism, they have what's called the CADC prayer. They might say it up to a year, every month. Pray for the deceased for a year. My wife would wear our son's name. His name was Joseph, the one that died, as a gold chain around her neck. Because no one would mention his name. It was like he never lived. No one would mention his name. She's like, he did live. But with the CADC prayer, loved ones can pray for the person every month. A Kaddish. In Japan, they have what's called the death store, where they take pictures of everything. And if your loved one died without having some of these things, you can bring a picture of that to their gravesite. So they died, they never had a spouse. You go to the death store, that'd be a good spouse for you. Let me bring that picture to your grave. Or if they never had a home, I think this would be a nice house for you if you were alive. They bring the picture of the house. But they've never had a car. I think you want to drive a Lamborghini. Let me get a picture from the death store of a Lamborghini and bring it to your gravesite. In Japan, they have what's called the summer festival, the Aban, where they bring these boats made out of they're candles in the shape of boats, and they light them, put them on the Pacific Ocean, and call out the names of the ancestors that died. In Latino Hispanic culture, they have what's called the Day of the Dead. Some Native American cultures, they have what's called the Feast of the Dead, where they bring food to the altar and they do Native American dances. What else may be helpful besides talk therapy? Chat rooms, journaling. By the way, the great majority of rappers suffer from father hunger and poverty. They say they're rapping, but they really are journaling. Journaling is therapy. Rapping is therapy. Art being in nature. You know what's nice about nature? It answers several questions. Think about it. Every fall, the leaves turn orange and then brown. They fall off the trees. But they grow back. Like we suffer losses, right? But we continue to love, right? Nature answers an interesting question. Late August, September, a bunch of leaves will fall off the trees. Come October, November, more leaves. But it's now January. That tree lost all of its leaves, but there's still 2 leaves in that tree. In January, the west fell in August. Why is that leaf somewhere still up there in January? We don't know. It's a mystery. The same way we don't know why somebody dies at 21 and somebody else dies at 91. It's a mystery. Music can be healing for people who suffer losses. Meditation. You know what people have shared with me is that meditation puts you in touch with your spirit. If some people suffer losses, when they meditate, they feel like the spirit lives on. The spirit lives on forever, some people will say. Yoga, doing physical type of therapy, exercise like yoga can be therapeutic when we suffer losses. Okay, we are coming to the end, my friends, and here's what I want to say to you before we end. What I've learned over the years is less about anything I teach, but more about the action you take. One more question. What's the one action you're going to take when our webinar is over as a result of the time we spent together today? What will you do? What's your action? You can put that in chat. Then I'm going to share something with you.
And Mark, is it okay if I say something too?
Yes.
Just a reminder too that as we're getting closer to the end of this presentation, that the way that certificate of attendances work now is that a link will go in the chat, and that link will be connected to the survey of the presentation. And so you'll fill out all the questions of the survey. That will lead you to another link. That link is your certificate of attendance, and you can print it or save it to your files. Okay, so they're starting to answer this question. Spend time, share love with loved ones, go through all your notes. Someone said, thank you, Mark. Someone says, live life and value each day, and personal reflection.
Okay, so thank you for that. And let me just say a couple things to you. The good news. Now it's time for the really good news. I'll lean in again for dramatic effect. Long-term studies, the long-term studies, the 50-year studies on addictions recovery reveal that 75% of individuals with a substance use disorder will eventually recover. 75%. The reason we do harm reduction and peer counseling is to help people stay alive for the miracle to occur. If they stay alive, 75% are going to enter recovery. There was a baseball player named Darryl Strawberry who played on a team called the Mets. He was addicted to crack cocaine. He would miss Mets game, New York Mets games, and go into Harlem or the Bronx and smoke cocaine. He's now in long-term recovery. There was an actor by the name of Robert Downey Jr. You remember Robert Downey Jr., the poster child for active addiction? He's in long-term recovery. No one got high like Elton John in the 70s and 80s. He's in recovery 33 years. And one of the things he did 12 years ago was reached out to a rapper who had said bad things about Elton John. Elton John is an adult. He bypassed that and called that rapper and says, I want to help you with your addiction. The rapper's name is Eminem. He's now in recovery 12 years, right? 75% will eventually get recovery. Our job is to instill hope and help them stay alive for the miracle to occur. Guess what? Research says, long-term studies, 1/3 of people with mental illness will remit completely. You would never know they had that diagnosis. You would never know. Like when they turn 60, 65 years old. You never know. 1/3 make some progress. 1/3 remit completely. 1/3 make some progress. And then only 1/3 stay about the same or make no progress, right? People get better. And that's why we do what we do. So I ask you a question about clinics, right? We're the only profession in the world where clinics are as important to our work as having a pen, a computer, right? And paper to write on. Because we've earned people's tears. So when Michael Jackson, the singer, was in the prime of his career, he was listening to his music through a $5 transistor radio. His music producer, Quincy Jones, said, Michael, you just did Billie Jean and Bad. You're the #1 performing artist in the world. Why are you listening to your music through this $5 radio? Michael Jackson said, lots of people who hear my music are gonna listen to my music through something like this $5 radio. He says, I wanna hear what they hear. And you can hear the pain in people's stories that other people can't hear. And you can feel empathy towards people that others can't feel. And you're using those gifts to make the world a better place. I remember when Michael Jackson died. My little brother was in early recovery. And he went into action. My little brother was living in Gary, Indiana. He rented out the house directly across the street from the house that the Jackson 5s grew up in Gary, Indiana, and started selling Michael Jackson t-shirts as people came from all over the world to view the house that Michael Jackson grew up in Gary, Indiana, after he died. And my brother brought in enough revenue to open 2 women's clothes stores, all triggered by the death of Michael Jackson. He said, man, when you have active addiction, it makes you creative. That's why I went into action. Let's continue to help our clients. Thank you so very much for spending these 2 hours with me, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so very, very much.
Well,
Thank
also,
you.
thank you, Mark. What a wonderful presentation. It was just
Thank you so much.
terrific. I did go ahead and drop that certificate of attendance in the chat. And Mark, are you hanging out for a little bit?
I'm here.
Okay. This is a good time to ask Mark if you have any questions or would like to make comment. And also, please feel free to turn on your camera or use your microphone too. You don't necessarily have to put it in the chat if you don't want to.
I just want to thank you, Amy, for bringing Mark back to us. Amazing
Thank
as
you.
usual. Thank you.
Always, right? Always.
Mr. Sanders,
Yes, hi.
hi again. Dealing with the grief that a person may have as a result of not being able to use, not being able to discontinue use.
Yes.
Any suggestion about how I would?
There's an evidence-based practice that's used with teenagers and young adults. It's called the 7 challenges, right? And one of the early questions they ask them is like journaling. They do a lot of journaling around recovery. Is what do you miss about drug use? And that's real.
Yeah.
Because in a lot of people's recovery, you're not trying to get them to glorify it or to get themselves excited about it, but what do you miss? And they miss things like the feeling of the high. They miss being numb, or they miss that get high crowd, right? And part of grief is to let people tell their story, right? So I think that, and I love what Montel Williams said. The talk show host Montel Williams?
Yes.
He was, he had a cocaine dependence. He said what saved him was to just say to himself that nothing would ever make him feel as good as cocaine made him feel. To just acknowledge that, to say it out loud. Nothing, he said, made me feel that good. He said, but it's killing me. I knew I had to give it up, right? So just allowing people to tell their story and making sure they have community to tell their story in. Because if they share that story around other people in recovery or seeking recovery, there are going to be people who say, you're not alone. Me too.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Amy, thank you so much for having me here. And I'll go ahead and sign out, and I hope to see everybody soon. Thank you so much.
Yes, let's stay in contact through email about next year and about what we talked about before we even got started today. I'll email you.
Gotta
Uh,
go.
oh.
Time for my, next person.
Oh, I thought you had another question there. But yes, I'll email you tomorrow. Does that sound good?
It sounds perfect.
Okay. Well, then we'll
All right,
talk to you
thank
real
you,
soon.
Amy.
Okay, you
All right,
betcha.
bye-bye.
But
Mark,
thanks, Mark, again.
Mark, last
Thank you
question.
so much,
Mark.
Mark.
Oh,
I'm ready
somebody
I'm
has
ready
one
for the
last
question.
question.
Yes, we're ready.
Are you gonna be at the crisis intervention or substance abuse conference in September and October?
I'm going to be at that big conference in the Dells in October.
Great, thank you.
It's
What
at the
is that one?
Kalahari Resort.
What is that one, Mark? Is that
It's the
Wisconsin
state-
based?
It's the state's conference, the state of Wisconsin's conference, mental health and substance use disorders conference at the Kalahari Resort.
Yeah, I wonder who puts that on. I'm wondering if that's Wisconsin based Family Services that does that.
Amy, I'll
Yeah,
send you an
I think
email.
it's
Oh,
it's
yes,
DHS.
please.
I think that's DHS's conference. It's huge.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's
11,
the
1200 people.
DHS conference.
Okay, yes, please send me an email. I'm wondering if I already have it. Okay. Thank
I'm
you
sending
all.
it now.
Thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark. We'll see you. I'll talk to you real soon.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank
I'm
you.
gonna put the certificate of attendance in one more time. Also, don't forget to email me. I did see I have some emails about jingle booths, so we'll get back to you about that stuff too, folks. But let me do the certificate of attendance one more time here. So the way that it works, if you haven't ever done it before, you just click on it, you answer a few questions, you push submit at the bottom, and then it will lead you to another link.
And then you have to fill out the information and then you just download it for yourself.
Yeah. You can you can download it and then write in your name if you'd like, but some people like to do it electronically. Does anybody have any questions about Jingle or anything coming up for MC3? If you do, this is a good time to ask too. We have just a few more minutes if we want to use them.
After completing the survey, we go to a link for the certificate.
Yep,
Okay.
you got it.
Yeah, and then you have to kind of hit share with yourself. So you hit another.
Yeah, it will come up as a download, and then you've got to go into that download.
Okay, yeah, I think I can handle that.
We'll hang out with you while you do it.
Yeah. Hey, thank you, Amy, for
Yeah, I'm
bringing
glad.
Mark
Yeah,
back.
I always love when Mark has already agreed to come back next February. So I'm super excited about that and what we've already decided to talk about for next year. Really good. So already on board for another year for us. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it looks like he's made some changes for himself, actually.
Yeah. Well, and he did say, he enjoys speaking in person at Italian Community Center. I tried to talk to him about maybe taking one of the summer month positions for next year, and he didn't bite. He just wants to stay with February. So that's a virtual meeting. That's okay.
I have had the experience of sharing or being in the training with him in person, and he's off the chain.
I know.
Uh,
It really is.
He really motivated me to get into this field of practice and provided a lot of good information as he did today.
Yeah. He's such a
Hey,
good storyteller too.
Yeah, yeah. They used to,
Amy, this is Melissa from Our Space. Hi, Arthur. I am in tears. Maybe we should be warned on getting Kleenex for ourselves. I have
Yeah.
been a mess since it started. It hits so
Oh.
hard.
Oh,
yeah.
are you okay?
Yeah, I'm good.
yeah.
Okay,
it's,
okay.
Wow, I keep a box of Kleenex in my car when I
Yeah,
come.
thanks, Arthur. Where are you right now when I need it? But yeah, thank you. It was awesome.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad that you liked it. Yeah, Mark is definitely one of our staple presenters because he just is always just somebody that touches you know the nerve of whatever it is that we're talking to about that day. And so he can always get the story across, always get the point across, always get the message, the information, the wisdom across. So yeah, he always comes back and I'm always grateful.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you.
For
Yeah,
me,
have a good day. Have a good rest of your week. We're right in the middle here. So just a couple
Yep,
more
you too.
days to go.
Right in the middle.
Right in the
Adios.
middle.
Nice to see
Right in
you.
the middle.
Take care.
Hello,
Hi.
hello. I'm unable to download the certificate. I answered all the questions.
Do you want to email me and I'll send it to you?
Okay, what's your email?
Do you want me to put it in the chat?
Oh, yeah,
And then you can go ahead and just copy and paste it.
okay, do that, please.
There you go. If anybody else needs it too, just go ahead and copy and paste it. And I won't send you a link. I'll go ahead and just send you the certificate, and that way you don't have to mess with the survey. Because probably if you've already filled out the survey, it's probably already been recorded, which is fine.
You know what? It gave me a few minutes to tap on there and it disappeared. You know, I ain't that good with all this.
Me either. Me either. I just kind of wing it.
Hold on.
But we won't see you all till August. And so then we'll be here for MC3 orientation. That's usually a smaller crowd, but that's okay.
But then we get to go to the zoo
Yeah.
in September. Woo!
Yeah. Did you like the name that I called it? I wrote the descriptor this morning. MC3 review at the zoo.
MC3 review at the zoo, and you'll learn all about the steering committee that helps to steer,
and the subcommittees,
and the subcommittees, which actually help to promote this venue.
All right, guys, I'm going to hop off. You have my email. If you need anything from me, as soon as I gather everybody's emails from today, then I'll get the PowerPoint out. And I might just send the certificate of attendance out too. We'll see if I can get that too.
Right.
Yeah, send this, please send it, because I couldn't do none of that.
I'm trying to download it and it's not working.
All right, don't worry. Usually we can make it work. Thank you all for attending. I'm glad that you're with us today. Enjoy the rest of your week.
And thank you for
Hey, thank you, Amy.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. Good to see everyone.
Good to Hey, yeah. Lawrence, I'm not gonna be able to come.
Okay.
Are you gonna be home tomorrow morning?
I'm going to see my PO tomorrow morning.
At what time?
I have to be there at 11, I think.
Could I come by maybe around 9 o'clock?
Well, they'd be up then.
Okay, well, I'll try to see you tomorrow afternoon then if that's okay.
Oh, okay.
Because the air is real bad and I'm waiting for my oxygen tanks to be delivered and they haven't come yet. So aside from bringing you some ice cream, if you still want it tomorrow, is there anything else I can do?
Sounds good.
I'll talk with you tomorrow.
Okay, Mr. Lawson.
All right. Thank you. You sound like you got a sore throat. You sound like you got a sore throat.
No, it's not sore, it's just hoarse.
Okay. I'll
It
talk.
was sore last night. It's not sore now.
Okay, well, I'll talk with you tomorrow.
Okay.
All right, God bless you, brother. Hope you feel better.
Melissa's cell number or Melissa space Wisniewski.
Hi, Melissa.
Arthur,
Yes, ma'am.
you.
I'm okay. I was out a little bit this morning, but I decided to come in. It was pretty.
No, I can't say that. I just called you to tell you that I love you and I care about you very much.
Oh, thank you very, 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 very much. I love you too. Wait a minute. I got one question for you.
Yeah.
Wasn't Mark awesome?
I'm in tears. Do you understand?
Listen, that is the guy that started me off as a recovery coach. I took the training from him for 2 weeks. And I let him know that today when I talked to him too. So
Yeah, that's awesome.
yeah, he was.
Well, your day's just gonna keep getting better because guess who called me looking for you?
Who's that?
Eugene Williams.
Oh, okay.
He's in Chicago. He's doing good. He was fishing and his phone ended up in the drink. So I am texting you his phone number right now.
Okay.
And hoping that you will call him.
I will do that.
Give you an update and tell you what's this and what's that and da.
Okay. Thank you, Melissa.
So I just had a good conversation with him too. We talked about me being a lead foot, so there's that.
All right.
All right, so give him a call, let him know that we're all thinking about him and that we're glad that he reached out. I told him the same thing.
Thank you. You
Yep,
be
you're
well.
welcome.
Bye.
Okay, love you.
I love you
Bye,
too.
bye.
Bye. Hello?
You get it out. You print it out.
Who's that?
Huh?
Hey, how you doing? You still on the phone?
Did you print the thing out? I'm trying to see how to print this thing out.
They said they're gonna send them to us.
Oh, okay. So we ain't gonna worry about that.
Right, because I tried to print mine off too. I got to the part where it says download and it wouldn't download.
And I ain't got to that part.
What, did you do the survey?
Nope.
Well,
Where the survey at?
I didn't logged off, so it's shit. You know what? Just hold off, cause everybody knew you were attending, and they're gonna send a
Okay, I ain't gonna. All right, sounds good. We ain't gonna worry about it then. All right,
You okay though?
I'm good, dog. For sure. All right.
Talking to my computer. How you do that?
Huh?
You on my desktop? How you do that? I'm on laptop.
You still signed in? I don't know. I was here the whole time listening to y'all, but I was here.
Did you hear me talking to Melissa?
Yep, I talked to everybody. Yep.
All right, man. I'll talk to you
All right,
later. Hey, are we open Monday?
I'm not sure.
Huh.
Yes, third. The fourth is Tuesday, ain't it?
Right.
Yeah, I think we open. I don't know. Let me check and see. I'm not sure. I'll get back with you.
All right. Bye.
Oh, yeah.
After you have finished your message, just hang up. Or to hear more options, please press 1.
Good afternoon, Mr. Robinson. Arthur Bias here, peer support for Johnny Hall. When you have an opportunity, will you give me a call? I'd like to talk to you about Mr. Robinson, about Mr. Hall. Phone number is 414-313-9743. Again, Arthur Bias, peer support specialist, 414-313-9743. Hope you're having a good day. Yes, ma'am. I got a question for you, miss. I got a question for you.
Hey, hello. I said
I
hi.
said hello.
Well, you said I had a question. Like,
Yeah,
let me
come
breathe
around,
first.
come around the other side.
Give me a second, girl.
Well, this ain't no big, ain't no complicated stuff. I just need you to show me what am I doing wrong about being able to print this.
I forgot to get his key back. Dang it. Oh.
Where you going?
Give me a second, girl.
What you about to eat? Was that watch working? Huh? What I need to know is how do I print this?
What are you on?
Huh?
What is this that you are on?
I don't know. What do you mean, what am I?
Word. So usually file and print somewhere. Right here.
What do you mean? Word. Is it enable printing? Should I push that?
You got a glare going off, so I can't see the whole thing all the way.
Printing is not available in protected view. To leave protected view and enable this command, you must select enable printing. Should I do that?
Hmm?
Press.
Here. Oh, I gotta call you.
Thank you. Randy?
Huh?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. accidentally took the return bank key home. I'm not coming back up there. But I'm gonna be going now. Well, I'm right. No, I never. Maybe let them know. I just want to be sure that I communicate. Say, well, like, where is it? Everything. So. Well, it's like 3. It should be like 3 more. So. Yeah, that'll be that.